Welcome to a two-part workshop on noticing and recasts from the Center of Languages and Intercultural Communication at Rice University. In the first segment, Kate White and Sylvia Kunitz will introduce you to the concept of noticing in cognition and in interaction. In the second segment, Kate and Sylvia will show you how noticing may be connected to one type of feedback, recasts. You will also hear from the language teachers who attended the workshop as they discussed noticing, recasts, and how these topics relate to their teaching practices. So, as you view this workshop, consider the following question. How can this topic connect to what you do in class? Let's start with some feedback from some of the language teachers on what they took away from this workshop.
With this specific workshop, I think a lot of the things that I do in the class told me that I'm doing something that is right, and also told me to change some things.
Well, there are a lot of things that I started paying more attention to, and I was like, I've been doing all these things that we talk about, at least most of the things I think, but that's in the natural environment, and then when I go to the workshop, I come out going, oh yeah, I did that today.
I think so. It's a good combination. You have Kate's theories about cognition, how brain works, and then you have Sylvia's concrete data there. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I think so.
So let's talk about noticing. What is noticing is the first question that we should probably address. Well, here's the definition from Schmidt, who is the father of the noticing hypothesis. And, well, it says the registration of the occurrence of a stimulus event in conscious awareness and its subsequent storage in long-term memory. In other words, paying attention to an aspect of the input in such a way that you process it. So the other really important part of attention is that it's finite. You don't have infinite amounts of attention. You only have so much, and working memory is where it's decided how much goes to what.
As Kate says, attention is finite. What does this mean for learners?
Because you cannot, and one thing that I got from the workshop and kind of made me think is they cannot, focus on many things at once.
So, as we said, in other words, noticing is attending to an aspect of the input in such a way that it is processed and stored. Or, as the reading said that you did for today, a concrete outcome of a person paying focal attention to something. So you pay attention to it, with awareness or not, depending on who you ask, and then somehow you've noticed it and therefore your working memory is dealing with it, right? It's not just out there and you're not paying attention to it. So noticing is seen by many as the first step in a long process of language building, right? Noticing isn't everything. You're not going to notice it and then know it forever. But you have to notice it, maybe, for anything else to happen along the way. So let's talk about some terminology before we go any farther. I'm sure you're maybe familiar with this relationship. Input, intake, interlanguage output. Just really quickly to review, input is the target language information to which the learner is exposed, and it must be comprehensible for it to be meaningful for the learner. Intake is the portion of the input that the learner, depends on who you ask, what comes next, notices. For Schmidt, obviously, because talking about noticing comprehends. For others, and that you make meaningful connections from, which some people understand that as noticing. So it just depends on who you ask how this is particularly defined. But interlanguage is the developing internal linguistic system of the learner. So now that you've taken all the information in, what's going on? How are you storing it? Where is it stored? How is it interacting with languages you already know? And then output is the L2 material produced by the learner or the speaker, right? So Schmidt's original definition of noticing falls over here, right? So if you're noticing something in the input, it allows it to become intake because you've paid attention to it and you're maybe aware of it. Learners must attend to and notice linguistic features of the input in order for that information to become intake. Basically was his argument. Or in other words, the presence alone of the form in the input is not enough. Just having it out there isn't enough. The learner has to interact with it in some way.
If presence in the input isn't enough, what can teachers do to encourage learning?
And what can we do to make the result more effective? And how do we know it's effective?
We want to be able to find evidence of noticing, and it's hard to do that because this is all something that's happening in your brain. How do you get evidence that it's happening at all, right? So, as many have argued, it's hard to challenge the noticing hypothesis because it's maybe not directly testable is the issue. The psychological construct of noticing is difficult to assess because all these different definitions of attention and awareness and how they interact. So one way that this has been operationalized a lot in research is think aloud protocols, which are controversial. Basically, you're asking students to talk out loud about what's going on in their head as they do something, which there are a lot of issues there with, of course, output and asking someone to speak and write at the same time maybe. Or it's a lot of different processing avenues, so it's interesting in a lot of ways, but also maybe not exactly what we want in terms of finding evidence of noticing. There's also self-report after the fact. People will do, did you notice this, basically. Eye tracking studies are used more now because we have that technology, and also brain imaging, fMRI. So we're not going to get into that, but these are all ways that we've tried to find out if noticing is occurring on an individual level. The cognitive perspective of noticing, we're talking about what's going on with the learner internally at different stages of processing, right? An issue with this is that maybe it's helpful for us to understand cognition and sort of see what's going on with our students in their minds at any given moment. But where is the evidence, right? We don't have evidence of noticing, maybe. So remember that Azumi said that the opportunities for noticing to happen for you as a learner or a speaker occur in interaction. So with that in mind, maybe we should also look for evidence in interaction. So now we're going to transition into CA, and I'll come back later.
As we transition to thinking about finding evidence of noticing in interaction, can you think of any moments where you knew for sure that a student noticed something about the language? How did you know? Let's hear what Sylvia has to say about finding evidence through conversation analysis.
CA is an observational discipline, so it's very much, I see it, I touch it, I can analyze it. I don't see it, can't say anything about it, okay? So, therefore, we in CA don't really have the methodological tools that are necessary to see what is happening in the individual mind-brain. So I'm not going to tell you what's happening in the mind-brain because I can't do it. I'm not trained for that, okay? And also, and that's a difference with what, with respect to what Kate was saying before, CA is kind of agnostic about the role of cognitive processes in learning. So we can talk about cognitive processes as they emerge as observable behaviors in interaction, but then we are not equipped with a very specific theory to make a connection between cognitive processes and learning. So it's kind of like we look at interaction, we look at cognitive processes as they emerge in interaction, and then we hand over the plate to them and say, hey, you guys, now you figure it out, how it works, okay? This is the evidence that you wanted, now play with it. In CA, we distinguish between noticing as a perceptual cognitive event, which is pretty much what Kate has been talking about so far, which is an individual thing, whether it happens in interaction or not, and noticing as an interactional event that is implemented by an utterance. So like your wife comes back and you want to say, oh, great haircut today. Otherwise, you're in trouble. And it can also be implemented by embodied actions, okay? The upshot of all this is that CA is interested in how participants do noticing in real time in the situated unfolding of talking interaction. So we're going to look at examples of how noticing actually emerges in interaction. Interactional noticing is defined as an action in conversation that brings into relevance some features of the setting, which then becomes the source of the noticing. It also displays the speaker's stance, or typically displays the speaker's stance towards the noticed object. It allows to collaboratively achieve a joint focus of attention that becomes the ground for future collaborative actions. And an interactional noticing makes relevant specific next actions. Okay, so interactional noticings have been studied also in language learning environments, okay? And it's kind of a new interest in CA. What people have noticed is that these sequences, these interactional noticing sequences, have various functions depending on who are the participants. For example, L1 speakers and L2 speakers, or teacher and students. Who initiates the noticing? Is it initiated by the L2 speaker? Is it initiated by the teacher? Is it initiated by the student? Okay, and what is the feature that the noticing targets? Okay, so for example, in this case, these are family dinners, and actually that's the other thing that matters, the larger activity, what it is that the participants are doing, and how are they interpreting that larger activity in that moment right now. Okay, So, for example, in a family dinner, you have L2 speakers noticing new vocabulary items, okay? Or you can have, in a classroom, this is the article that you read, it's communicative practice, but the teacher initiates sort of instructional noticing sequences or attention mobilizing sequences on inaccurate forms. So the target is getting to accurate forms. We're going to look at how attention work or noticing is done through repair. And repair is actually considered in CA as a specialized type of noticing. And in our examples, the trouble source are going to be the inaccurate forms used by the L2 speakers or the students. So basically, we're going to look at how attention to and awareness of linguistic forms are done as observable behaviors. Okay, so this is the typical repair sequence. Minimally, you have a trouble source and a repair completion. You can also have trouble source, repair initiation, and repair completion, okay? In the case of recasts, for example, you only have trouble source and repair completion. So the recast is this thing, okay? So why is repair noticing? Well, basically, a repair initiation mobilizes the co-participant's attention on some trouble here in what was said before or in what is coming next. Like when you get stuck looking for a word, you're signaling that you're having trouble with something that you're about to say. And also, a repair initiation makes relevant repair completion, okay? This one is an example that some of you have already seen. In this case, it's again a tutoring session with a different student. This time it's Pat. Here they're talking about a TV series, and Sonia is asking Pat if she thinks that some of the actors in the TV series are more difficult to understand than others. And Pat basically is saying that, the kids can be pretty difficult because they speak too fast. This is what she's trying to say. What does she say, though? She says, the children, we speak, okay? So she produces a trouble source, and she herself, so the student herself, initiates repair on the trouble source by saying, is that right, Par? No, okay? So she's noticing, okay, that there is something wrong with the form that she used before. And then she completes the repair by producing the accurate form. They speak.
So, on the basis of this example, what should a student do to be able to self-correct?
A form that then later she incorporates in the continuation of her turn. So what do we learn in this case? Well, she knows that subject and verb need to agree with each other. She has trouble with it, but she notices the trouble and manages to solve it. Okay.
It's interesting what you're saying, because one thing that they need to notice is what they would do in their own language. Notice what you do in your language first, in an interaction.
I mean, I think with the shift to language analysis of naturally occurring data, it's much clearer, right? And one of the things that we were talking about with Victoria, because both she and I have done the study abroad program, is once you've equipped students with the ability to notice and then be aware, it is a long-term change. I've had so many students tell me after study abroad or after one of the courses where we do language analysis, you've ruined me. Now I don't just passively accept language. You've taught me a way to look at language in the long term, right? So we've equipped them with the tools to notice, become aware, and then that have an effect on their language. So I know it's anecdotal, but it has happened for groups that do the language analysis.
In this first segment of the workshop, Kate and Sylvia addressed the following questions. What is noticing? How do we talk about noticing in cognition and in interaction? You also heard from the teachers who attended the workshop as they discussed how these topics relate to their teaching and working with students. How can you consider noticing in your own teaching? This is the end of the first segment. Please proceed to the second segment on recasts. Thank you for watching.